Hello ladies and gentlemen. A few weeks ago I had to present a history project regarding the war in Vietnam, and because I needed a high grade in order to pass the class, I decided I need to make an interesting project, and I said, well, people respond good to pictures, therefore I will find the most interesting pictures I can. And what I found was this really interesting pictures of 3 Vietnamese children running away from a napalm bombing site from the Americans. This picture was so interesting because of the naturalness of the children, the sorrow in their faces, the terror and their despair, and that picture really showed us the real face of war and what war is really about. When I showed this picture to my classmates, the reaction was one of complete shock. At that moment my classmates saw for the first time what the war in Vietnam was really about. Not stupid statistics that teachers teach us, not random years and whatnot. No, they saw real pictures, they saw first-hand footage of what was really happening in Vietnam. But did you ever wonder where this footage comes from? Well, this footage comes from what we call war journalism. War journalists are people who go in the war zones, in the battlefields, in order to capture the important moments in the war zones, and in order to document what is happening there. Now, what the proposition team is proposing today is that war journalists need more protection because their current protection is not enough. Now, what they currently receive, this war journalists, is protection from the Geneva Convention that basically states that, well, they receive the same protection that every single civilian would get, but in order for them to take the pictures and whatever they need for the reports, they need to have special accreditation for journalism. Now, we think that this is not enough, and what the proposition team is proposing today is for them to have the same legal protection and the same legal status as Red Cross and Red Crescent medics in war zones. Now, what exactly this protection for Red Cross and Red Crescent medics is that they have a special symbol, which is the Red Cross in most of the world, namely Asia, Europe, America, and Australia. We also have the Red Crescent for Islamic countries, and also the Red Star of David for Jewish countries. Now, what this symbol basically says is that this person cannot be killed, this person cannot be harmed, and killing one of this or harming one of this person is considered a war crime and will be sanctioned as such. Now, in my case, in the proposition case, my first 2 substantial points are going to be firstly why is the current protection not enough, and secondly, why are these people so important and why we should care about them. Now, some people might say, well, they already have the protection, they are treated as civilians, therefore this is enough. Well, what we're saying today is that, ladies and gentlemen, this is not enough, and we have several cases in which these people have been abused or worse, killed. For example, in the war in Algeria that went on between 1993 and 1996, 58 people died. In the war in the Philippines, between 83 and 87, 36 persons died. And also, more recently in Afghanistan, Luis Castro and Victor Silva, both reporters and journalists for the RTP Portugal television, were captured for 4 days by the American troops and have been subjected to torture and violent interrogation because of basically the paranoia of the American troops. We think that any civilian involved in a war zone, regardless of who he is, regardless of who he works for, and regardless on which side of the barricade he is in, should not be subjected to such inhumane conditions. Although the Geneva Convention that I talked about earlier strictly prohibits acting as such and treating people in such inhumane conditions, but as we told you, this is not enough. People do not care about the Geneva Convention, therefore we still see a lot of abuse coming, and we see a lot of human suffering at least, that are basically innocent civilians that are just trying to do their job and show the people back home what is really happening. These people put their lives at risk, and we think that this should not happen. We think that today war journalists are pretty much one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, and these people put their life at stake, and we think that this should not happen under any circumstances to any civilian whatsoever, regardless of absolutely anything. Now, moving on to my second point is, well, why should we care about war journalists? What is their role in a war zone, and how exactly do war journalists help us? Well, as I said earlier, the first thing I'm going to talk about the historic value of war journalists. As I told you earlier, statistics are interesting, why not? Years are interesting, why not? And written stuff are interesting. But we think that in order to understand the war better and in order to have a vivid historic representation of what really happened, that we need real footage. And we think that giving this protection to the war journalist will provide us with more historic footage, because having more protection, more people will do that, and the people that have already been doing this are now more protected and will not end up being captured or killed. And secondly, let's think about war for a second. Now, the world we live in today is completely different from the medieval war, for example, and the wars that we had in medieval times are different from this one. The most interesting and important aspect, and the one that I'm going to talk about today, is the aspect of the public eye. Now, as we saw in the war in Vietnam, for example, that I mentioned earlier in my speech, let's think about war journalists and what they basically do. What they do is they capture images and they write reports, and they are basically a bridge between the war zone and what is happening there and the people back home. Now, the people back home, even though this might sound kind of counterintuitive, actually have a great impact upon the outcome of that war. And back to the point of Vietnam, let's think about all those vivid protests that were going on in the 60s, and let's think about how that changed the outcome of the war. People back home knew what was happening and they reacted to it. And when people have an opinion and people have a reaction, this might change the outcome of the war. But in order for them to have a reaction, they need material, they need footage, and they do not need any type of footage. They need first-hand footage, true footage, not propaganda footage, in order to make have a full picture of what is really happening in there. And this is exactly what war journalists give us today. Real footage, first-hand footage, real images of what is happening to there, in order for the public eye to be on the war zone and for people to know what is actually happening in there. And secondly, we think that war journalists and journalism done by such war journalists is extremely important, because they are basically, if you want to call it, a filter of the information. The people back home are no longer getting the information that the state or the government wants to give them. The people from back home are no longer subjected to propaganda. No, they get real first-hand information from the people in the war zone, and basically war journalism fights directly with the oppressive propaganda of the state. For all of these reasons, I want to thank you for your attention, and I beg of you to approve this motion in order to save the lives of the war journalists. Thank you.